115,000 ballots to count. They're mail ballots. Most of them are going to go for Biden. But these are the tough ballots to count. So of those 115,000, I know there's about 25,000 right now in Philadelphia. There's about 35,000 in Allegheny. But not all of those ballots are going to be counted. We don't know yet, because what they usually do is the more difficult ballots are counted later. And so my guess is there's going to be a number of those that won't be counted at all.
Why are they more difficult?
So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but why? What do you mean they're more difficult?
Because they may have problems with the ballots, right? They may not have filled out correctly. And so right now they're checking them to see whether they sort of meet the qualifications for being counted. And so some of them, it's always historically, and I know it's the case because we've talked to people, they're going through and checking them one by one to see whether or not they're going to count or not.
And I think a lot of us don't know about timing. How long does that take to count one by one? And just back to Savannah's point again, do you think that sometime in the course of this day that we will be able to make a call on the race?
There's a decent probability of that. I mean, it's looking very good for Biden right now. But, we're not there yet. He only has a little bit over a 5,000 vote lead. We're definitely going to need to get into a solid, 5-digit lead. And Philadelphia is expecting to get through their ballots today. Allegheny is going to count later at 5, starting at 5. So the timing's a little unclear. The one thing that we don't know also is there's probably 75,000 to 100,000 provisionals out there. Those usually break Democrat, but this is an unusual election, so we're just being careful.
Okay, so whoa, because we said 115,000 votes outstanding. That we heard that from the lieutenant governor. Now you just mentioned provisional ballots. First of all, you've got to tell everyone what that means, and then is that over and above the 115,000?
That is over and above the 115,000. So provisionals are where people basically come to the polling place and have to cast a ballot, and there might be an issue, for why they need to do that. The biggest issue in Pennsylvania is that if people decided that they requested an absentee ballot but decided that they wanted to vote in person instead, they needed to come to the polling place, bring their ballot with them. If they did not bring the ballot exactly as it was supposed to be with all of the pieces, they would need to cast a provisional. So we're expecting a lot of them to be under that scenario.
Okay, so the provisional ballot is, okay, we're going to let you file this ballot, but we're going to put those in a separate pile, and we're going to check them out and make sure you're legit and make sure this is right, this isn't fraud, and that's why they get counted last and they're harder to count. So, Ron Lipinski, thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Pennsylvania's over here, but you wonder about the other states, because we don't hear now much about Nevada and about Arizona and what's happening in those places. But could something else happen today?
Well, it could. By the way, the Trump campaign is sort of anticipating, they've already just put out a statement, the election is not over. That is the headline in this statement from the Trump campaign's general counsel, Matt Morgan. And they're saying the following in all the states. I'm going to summarize, not read directly. They say Georgia is headed for a recount, and I'm going to quote from the release, where we are confident we will find ballots improperly harvested, is what they're saying. This idea, they use a phrase about, do more people gather up absentee ballots and deliver them to a drop box in a chunk, in a group, let one person maybe gather from an entire, senior center or something like that. That's the implication. There's not evidence that there was some widespread use of this, and what they're defining as, quote, harvesting there. In Pennsylvania, they're alleging that their observers weren't allowed in, and that sort of has spoiled the process. In Nevada, they're citing this idea that people may have voted that didn't live in the state. That's that lawsuit that they're attempting to file that Pete Williams was telling us about last night. And then they're just projecting confidence about Arizona. They just believe that when all the votes are counted, they're going to win Arizona. So they're basically saying they're anticipating that a lot of news organizations are going to end up saying, hey, Joe Biden has gotten what he needs here. So they're just setting the stage. It's pretty clear whatever any media organization announces today, the Trump campaign is not ready to accept that.
Well, they're fighting a 3, 4, 5 front war right now.
And it's scattershot.
Results.
And that's the problem.
So they're saying in Pennsylvania, we got a problem with this, and Georgia, we got a problem with that, in Arizona, we think we're going to win it outright, in Nevada, we got this claim. So look, They can make those claims.
Quote Rich
to make
Howard.
them, they got to go. I don't remember what
Where
Rich
he
Howard
said
but you got to go
about
to court.
whining. He said that Donald Trump is somebody
But
that,
you were
yes,
talk-
he is a whiner.
But you were
He goes,
talking about
I whine
evidence.
till I win.
Yeah.
Well, be that as it may, I'm
And
not going
that's
to go
the
that far.
strategy.
Yeah.
It's not whining. If you have a legitimate claim, you are
legitimate.
well within your rights
Yeah.
to bring that claim before a court of law and have it heard and have the evidence heard. A recount, if you are within the margin
Sure.
of where a recount is allowed, you are well within your rights to pursue that. And so the Trump campaign has indicated that it'll do so, and the votes will continue
All
to
right,
be counted.
we did hear from the Trump campaign. Let's figure out what's going on in the Biden camp. Kristen, you've got some new info.
That's right, Hoda and Savannah. The reactions just pouring in from the Biden campaign and from Biden aides and allies. So let me just take you through the latest that we have. One top advisor, and I'm going to be reading off of my notes because it's literally coming in as we speak. One top advisor tells me that they are just thrilled. Campaign staff are elated. We got a text in all caps, feeling good. Someone else said they are already popping bottles over at the Biden campaign headquarters. But one advisor cautioning, hey, wait a minute, there's been no final call on these states that we're talking about, no final call on the whole race. So let's just hold out before we get too excited. So it's safe to say, though, that they are energized by the fact that Biden has now pulled ahead in Pennsylvania. You have all sorts of aides and advisors also on Twitter. One person tweeting out a picture of the president and saying, you're fired. Of course, that familiar tagline from The Apprentice. But just taking a step back, when you think about Biden's strategy, he visited Pennsylvania 14 times, more than any other battleground state. Now you see why. Now you see that that could potentially bear fruit. That could potentially be make or break for the vice president. And remember where he was on the final day of this campaign. He was in Pennsylvania, in Scranton, in Philadelphia, urging voters to get out and make their voices heard. We can now report that if there is at some point a call, we will hear from the vice president. So everyone watching and waiting along with all of us, but the anticipation growing. Guys.
Kristen,
Thank you, Kristen.
Yes, sit tight. We'll be back with you. Andrea joins us. Andrea, this is a moment, but they may be popping champagne over at Biden headquarters, but we got to wait till these votes are counted.
Well, like Lieutenant Governor Fetterman told you, math is math, and he's saying it one way. You heard from John Lipinski, there are provisional ballots, and there are quite a number of them, and they have to look at all of that. We have to be 95.5% sure, or 99.5% sure, rather, which is absolutely sure before we say anything this consequential at NBC News, and that is just, flat out. But the fact is, in Arizona, it could go either way, because in Arizona, you cannot presume this 80-20 split in the ballots that are about to come. As you know, people are used to mail-in balloting. It's not just the Democrats who are using that. It's Republicans and Democrats. In Nevada, we don't know where everything is coming from. It could be from Washoe County and the Reno area, not just in Clark County, and there are pockets of Republicans in Clark County and in Las Vegas. So, we just have to be very careful. The president is right to have some confidence in Arizona and maybe Nevada. But the problem for him is that the path, as we've been reporting all along, is so narrow. He's got to win 3 out of these 4 states. Joe Biden just has to take Pennsylvania. All he needs is 18 votes.
Well, that's what I was going to turn to Chuck. You set it up nicely because that's what's interesting. Here, Pennsylvania is the story of the hour, and it's incredibly consequential. But Arizona and Nevada is a separate path for Joe Biden, and he is leading there right now, although he's hanging by a thread there in Arizona. But let's say Arizona and Nevada went Joe Biden's way, he wouldn't even need Pennsylvania.
That's
he could
correct.
get
But
to 270 there alone.
What I was going to do is let's accept some of the Trump campaign's premises here so North Carolina, I agree with them there. So let's say that the recount and the military ballots give them Georgia, and that's fine. And let's say they catch Joe Biden in Arizona, as you can see here. The good news for the president is if that happened for him, he wouldn't need Nevada. Pennsylvania would actually be enough for Donald Trump, right? So actually, even Nevada wouldn't actually play a role here. So, but the problem is, it's just a one-state issue that the Trump campaign has because they can't win it without Pennsylvania, right? Let's say they got lucky in Nevada. So, as you see here, they could get all of this. And Pennsylvania by itself is enough for Joe Biden. So, look, I know they have these 4-state litigation strategy here. They have no choice. They're going to have to, if they're going to pursue a litigation strategy here, they only have one state that they have to focus on. There's no other way out of this. 20,000 votes in a recount in Wisconsin, you're just not going to find 20,000 votes. It's hard to find 2,000 votes in a recount. A 2,000 vote deficit, it's hard to make up, let alone a 20,000 vote. So, you know, I know they want to go through irregularities in all these other places, but the math indicates, going back to math, there's really only one state that matters that's left for either candidate, and it's Pennsylvania.
Well, you know, that brings us to Rich and Claire, our analyst, Claire McCaskill, former senator, Rich Lowry, editor of the National Review and a conservative. But Rich, is this a legal strategy or is this a political strategy? Because it seems like the ultimate goal here on the Trump campaign's part is to just sow doubt and sow questions. And where does that ultimately lead?
Well, first they want to keep this alive, and that means forestalling media organizations from calling the race for Joe Biden. And this is why there's been such an obsessive focus at the White House on Fox News calling Arizona for Joe Biden, which turns out to have been a premature call. But they don't want a Trump-friendly network being the first one potentially to call the whole presidential race for Joe Biden. The optics would be terrible. And then there are a couple other layers to this onion. There's rhetoric. It's what the president says. Does he say it's fraud and not accept the result? That doesn't change anything concrete, but it it affects the sentiment within his own party, which is potentially significant. Then there's the legal aspect, and they just need to find a way to cast a cloud around enough votes in some of these states so they can say it's decisive. So they're engaged in that effort now. It doesn't seem to be compelling evidence of anything yet, but that's what they're going to try to do. And then the final layer, and where I think we should all be brushing up on the procedures, is challenging the electors. Is there some attempt to stop the electors from being appointed, sent to Congress from Pennsylvania using the state legislature?
On what basis?
Or is there an attempt to get Congress to not accept those electors? And my understanding, just reading very quickly a congressional research report, is that the Houses vote separately on objections to electors once they come to Congress. So you'd presume the Democratic House would reject an objection and the Senate might accept it. I'm not sure that that would be the case, but that wouldn't be enough for the president.
Hate it when you add legal
I know. We were just listening to the folks over at the Biden camp. Kristen Welker was saying that they're popping champagne. And Rich, do you think that's premature, or should they go ahead and pop it?
They shouldn't pop it yet. You know, there could be a shocker here somewhere along the line, but clearly it's trending their way. And I've been a Biden skeptic back in the primaries. I don't think he ran a very compelling general election campaign. But if these blue wall states hold for him, it is a vindication of the essential strategic insight of his campaign, which he just needs to be slightly more appealing in those states than Hillary Clinton was. Not a huge amount, because the margin was so small for Trump in 26, just a little bit. And it looks like that's what's happening.
Claire, we'll let you get in on this from the Democratic side of things. What do you think about the notion that folks are popping champagne corks over at Biden headquarters? And by the way, that was just one email from a source, so I'm not saying that they're, you know, officially popping champagne, but, you know, the notion of them celebrating right now.
I think they're going to wait until the rest of these ballots come in Pennsylvania. And I predict when they do, they're going to end up with a margin somewhere north of 75,000 votes. At that point in time, then they can pop the champagne, because my sources tell me, Savannah, that the segregated ballots, where there's the only wisp of a legal basis for any challenge, that those segregated ballots are somewhere around 10,000. That won't make any difference. That's not a big enough number that it'll even be relevant. And the Supreme Court will be glad not to have to weigh in if, in fact, that turns out to be true. So this really boils down to, do they have a legal case? And here's the problem the Trump campaign has. They are used to lying and getting away with it because it's just out in the ether. You can't lie in court. You have to have evidence. And every lawsuit they've brought, they've lost because they have no evidence. The only lawsuit they brought, it was settled. And they admitted in that lawsuit that there were Republican observers in the room. They just wanted to argue about where they stood, and it was settled. So they have not yet even brought one lawsuit with any evidence that a court would recognize. So I say, as soon as the rest of the votes are in Pennsylvania, I think they're fine to pop the champagne.
All right, Senator McCaskill, Rich Lowry, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. NBC's Tom Costello has been watching the vote count very closely for us all week. What are you seeing, Tom?
Well, a couple of points. You know, we've heard a lot of complaints about how long it is taking, specifically in Pennsylvania, to count the vote. It's important to point out the Republican legislature in Pennsylvania came up with the rules which said they could not start counting the mailed-in ballots that had already been flooding in. They could not start counting those until Election Day. Other states were allowed to start tabulating and counting in the days leading up to Election Day because they knew they had a mountain of votes coming in because of the pandemic. Pennsylvania's Republican legislature said, no, you can't start till Election Day, and that is why this is taking so long. Let's also stress here, and we've done it many, many times, but there is very little in what the president said last night that is actually true. The truth of the matter is this process to count the votes takes days, sometimes weeks. That has happened for 200-plus years in this country. We have become accustomed to the networks calling projections on when a candidate appears to be winning, but that's not the final vote. It's not the final call. It's not certifying the vote. This is a process that takes a considerable amount of time. I would also say, I'm sure like you have, I've received an awful lot of messages and activity on social media from people all over the country, friends of mine, concerned about stuff that is bubbling up on the internet, specifically in right-wing circles, calling into question the legitimacy of the counting process and of the vote. I think it's worth repeating many, many, many times that there is simply, at this point, no evidence that has been in any way validated of anything that's happening fraudulently across the country. Election officials from both parties who are running this election say that it appears to have gone incredibly smoothly, despite the fact that they have volumes and volumes of mail-in ballots, that the actual processing has gone very, very smoothly with Democratic and Republican observers in place the entire time watching the process. We've had very few reports of mechanical breakdowns, a couple of minor problems on Election Day itself, but beyond that, really that was isolated. And so ultimately this is a test of the democracy itself. And do we trust in a system that we've spent 200 plus years in developing? And it's, of course, coming down now to Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, living up to its name today, guys.
All right, Tom Costello. That was great perspective from Tom.
Yeah, let's go over to Peter Alexander. He's at the White House. Peter, you got your ear to the ground. What are they saying over there?
Yeah, you know, we're not hearing a lot from here at the White House, but we are speaking to campaign officials right now who describe the mood, according to two of them, as, quote, deflated right now. They say privately that they are exhausted, and there's a real apprehension that they're in for what could be a days-long fight without the potential for any concession from the president on the back end right here. And to that idea, and of course it's premature because this race is not over, the campaign even posting a statement saying the race is not over. We have spoken to campaign officials and those close to the president about whether there's even been a conversation with him about the potential of losing. And I'm told, quote, there is no talk of a concession. That's not a conversation anyone is having right now. So you really have this potential for what's going to be an uncertain several days ahead if the trajectory of this race continues in this direction right now. You saw the president walk into the briefing room yesterday and remarks that were really removed from reality, saying that there was widespread voter fraud, just going on and on about conspiracy theories, again, as Tom indicated, without providing any evidence. And I think one point that sort of best demonstrates the inconsistency of this message is that the president was touting Republican victories in the House and Senate at the same time as he was saying that he was cheated out of votes. You recognize those votes are cast on the same ballot. And that was just one of many inconsistencies that we've been seeing. It echoed what you've heard in recent days where some Trump supporters were saying, keep counting, and others were saying, stop the count, depending on the state and the position where the president was. That echoes what you hear privately, again, from campaign officials, saying that they don't know what the message is right now. It's not clear who the field general is right now. We're told by campaign officials that they are having conversations about who that person should be, who should be going before cameras today to communicate the public message of the campaign. Again, they put out a statement a short time ago from one of the attorneys within the campaign saying that this race is not